Hey guys, welcome back to the next video in the On Wax review series. It's been a long time coming, this one, I know, but I really needed to take the time to sit down, make this review, and finalize my thoughts on the latest album from pop sensation Billie Eilish, Hit Me Hard and Soft. Of course, co-written by her and her brother Phineas O'Connell, also produced by Phineas. This is her third studio album after her debut album, which is featured right here, of course, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, and her latest album from 2021, Happier Than Ever, which, if you remember, back when I did my top 5 albums of 2021, that one did make the cut, and I did love that record. I've loved everything that she's done up until this point, and if you guys didn't know, I'm very much a very ardent Billie Eilish stan when it comes to what she has come out with so far. And if you remember my thesis film I did for undergrad, you know that I am quite a huge fan of hers. And this album, of course, I was very, very much looking forward to on the offset, just because it has been 3 years since we last heard from Billie, all the way back in 2021, and there was probably no album for the rest of the year that I'm going to be excited for besides this one, and I am very happy to say that it doesn't disappoint. And I know a couple months ago I did my video on my top 10 female artists, and I had mentioned at that time that Billie Eilish did not make the cut and barely just missed. Of course, that video is also dated for other reasons as well, but mainly because Billie would have been on that list very firmly, planted at this point in time, because I have to say Hit Me Hard and Soft is an absolutely fantastic album. It really shows just how much she's matured as a songwriter, as a person, all that you can imagine. It's there on record, and I think she really goes a lot deeper on this album than she ever has before into a lot of her own personal anecdotes and experiences that she has had in the past few years with all this budding fame and everything to come with it, and of course a lot of relationship issues that have arisen in that time as well. And what I will say first before I dive into that and everything else, you should know that the production on this album is absolutely stellar. We should expect no less from Phineas at this point. And I really, really especially love how punchy the bass is throughout this entire album, and just the way it resonates on all these tracks, I think really makes this stand out in a way that maybe her other albums haven't yet. And so I think that is definitely one of the most noteworthy elements of this record in general. But as I said, this album is very much a breakup record in a lot of ways, and though I think it isn't, to a T the most conceptual record you will ever hear, I think it's certainly in the vein of Beyonce's Lemonade in that regard, and how it recounts, very specific instances of this relationship and kind of how it tracks down all the way through to its bitter end. Of course, that's not saying the same with Lemonade. She's still married to Jay-Z, but I say this in regards to how the album is structured in sort of a loose way where it's not entirely about that, but it still feels like it tells a whole story by the end and feels very holistic. I mean, this very much is a seamless album. Of course, you should expect that from this point with the production from Phineas. The tracks flow right into each other very seamlessly for a lot of these songs. And I absolutely love, love, love his work on this album as always. But let's get into the tracks, of course, kicking off this record with Skinny, which, I mean, this really is my favorite song on this entire album, and I think it's one of Billie's absolute most poignant and beautifully written songs, easily one of her best. And I think this one in particular stands out to me so much, not only because the way she is talking about how fame is perceived and how now that people see that she's skinnier, they suddenly perceive that as her being happy, and how a lot of times people don't really think about how beautiful she sees herself. You know, she says, but maybe that's the real me and I think she's pretty, which is such a beautiful, beautiful line. And just how she breaks down being thrust into the spotlight, you know, when she's like coming onto the stage, she feels like a bird in a cage, a dog in a dog pound. It's some really, really powerful, insightful lyrics. Not to say that this territory hasn't been explored before by maybe even her or other artists, but I think her especially taking a look back and all the criticisms and how the way everyone expects something from you at this point in time, you know, how people are lamenting she was like their best kept secret, and now she is like the one in the public eye more than many other pop artists in that realm. It really does break this down so beautifully. But besides that, what really makes this stand out as well is the soaring melodies on this thing, just the chord progressions. It's so sublime. And I really just think melodically, as soon as I heard this, I was just in awe, especially when you get to that chorus and she's singing I Still Cry, and the harmonies there, it's like, oh, it's just unbelievable. And I really think, yet again, another strength of this album is Billie's vocals keep getting better and better. I hate that people say, oh, she only just whispers, because she is far from a one-dimensional vocalist in the slightest. The way she goes into her head voice, and it's just really unbelievable, and I absolutely love this song. It's a great way to kick off this record, and of course that leads directly into Lunch, which was the first single released for this album, because she didn't release any before the album's release, which I think was a very, very smart move. And I find it interesting that this was the one she picked to be the single. And I think there's obviously some reasons for that. The way it's packaged, it's got a very punchy bass line. The groove is just infectious. I will say that about the song. But more importantly, this really is her talking about having, you know, oral sex with another woman. And of course, as we've learned lately, she has been outed, quite frankly, as being bisexual. And so this was a big development, and this is the first time that I think she's really openly talked about this on record. And so in a lot of ways, I really appreciate her being able to embrace her sexuality and who she truly is. But to be honest, I think this is the weakest song on the record. I think the lyrics really kind of make me cringe in a lot of ways. And look, I'm not adverse to writing stuff like that. I'll be the first to tell you. But my thing is, I think the way it's just delivered, I really just thought it was a little bit too much on the nose and doesn't really play off in a very clever way that just had me wincing at a couple moments. But yet again, I don't dislike this track at all. There's a lot to be admired with the production here, and, you know, her, of course, embracing her true identity. So I gotta give credit where credit's due in that regard. But in some ways, it's one of the most accessible songs on the album, and I can see why it was chosen for a single, though I don't really think it was the best choice. But that leads us into Chihiro, which is another great song. Not one of my absolute favorites on this record, but that's not saying a lot, because I think this album is extremely strong, and it really kind of likens back to Spirited Away, so really great song in that regard, shouting out one of the best Japanese animated films of all time. Really appreciate their love for Studio Ghibli there and Hayao Miyazaki. Of course, we've heard a similar song about anime from Casey Musgraves earlier this year, which I don't think panned out as well. But what I like here is she does hearken the story of Chihiro in Spirited Away, and kind of puts like her own personal touch on it, and sort of, you know, maybe wanting someone to let her into their life, you could say. But what I really, really love about this song is, especially on the chorus, the soaring, beautiful vocals. Yet again, I just think she keeps getting better and better, and her range is just absolutely nuts in what she's able to do with her voice, and I think that shines through on this track more than anything. But the way the synths build on this song, mwah, absolute ecstasy. I absolutely love how the song was built and produced by Phineas there, of course. And I think in that regards, it is a sonic standout, even though lyrically, I do think that there are better songs on this record, like the song that comes directly after it, Birds of a Feather. Oh my goodness, this is easily my second favorite song on this entire album, and one of my favorite Billie Eilish songs of all time, I must say. And the thing that's so great about the song is this is just pure pop melody at its absolute finest. And I absolutely love the hook she's singing on this song. It just gets immediately stuck into your head. And it's very reminiscent of late 80s Madonna. And I mean that in the best way possible. Like Cherish off of Like a Prayer immediately comes to mind when I think of the song and how it's structured. But the production, yet again, is really great, infusing what she's taken from Madonna with that electro-pop style underneath it, and it really shines through in so many beautiful ways. And it's such a great song about her, you know, experiencing this beautiful love for the very first time, and also her seeing this other person in perhaps a more beautiful way than they can see themselves. And it's very indicative of how this album goes throughout the course of the rest of it. But this is really such a wonderful highlight. And yet again, her vocals just reach some insane and beautiful heights by the end of this song. And she can really belt. Man, I'm telling you, like, she really puts it all out here vocally, and I think it's one of her finest performances as a vocalist to date. I think this should have been the single. It is probably, I would say, the most pop friendly in a way that's immediately accessible and just immediately memorable. And that's probably the best compliment I can ever give a pop song, which I will bestow upon Birds of a Feather here. And that will take us into the next track, being Wildflower. And I think this is when you truly start getting into the more relationship breakup angle of this type of record. But this, more so than anything, is kind of signaling the start of her relationship, at least more intimately, with Jesse Rutherford, who this is allegedly about, and that would make sense, and kind of talking about how conflicted she is on this relationship, where it's supposedly saying that his ex came to her for comfort when they broke up, and then somehow she ended up being with him, and how do you still see her in the back of your mind is the question that she poses. But throughout the song she says, I still see her in the back of my mind all the time. It's almost like this ever present sense of guilt for perhaps diving into this relationship. And I just think, yet again, it's just an absolute beautiful track that's very contemplative by nature, and just soaring melodies that ebb and weave so beautifully, the harmonies there. I just think it's definitely one of the most standout tracks on this album. And that's saying a lot for a album that's basically full of bangers. And this segues perfectly into The Greatest, which starts out as this very sparse guitar ballad, which builds into this very introspective and emotionally powerful rock-fueled climax. And the way she approaches the song in a very sort of self-congratulatory way, very much so, with a lot of irony, saying, man, am I the greatest, and kind of lamenting this sort of love that went unappreciated. She gave everything, but the love could not be reciprocated in that regard, obviously following perfectly off of the last song to kind of signal the linkage between the two relationships and the failure thereof. And I really love how she structures the song lyrically, saying, man, am I the greatest. And then at the end you get the very wonderful and brilliant passage that not only recontextualizes those lyrics and reinterprets them, but really drives the point of the song home, where she says, you said your heart was jaded, you couldn't even break it, I shouldn't have to say it, you could have been the greatest. And so obviously so much heartbreak is felt to the highest degree on this track. You really feel the passion coming out of every single moment of this ballad. And I just absolutely love how it's put together, how it's presented, how it's lyrically structured. I love that type of stuff. And so obviously I think that this is another one of the strongest cuts on this album. And then of course this leads into L'amour de ma vie, which translates to the love of my life. Of course, if you look at the lyrics, it definitely tracks. And what I love about this song is just how thick the bass is. Of course, I'm going to bring that up again. But just how laid back this track is, because lyrically this is very much an extension of the last song, where in that song she's kind of lamenting this breakup and regretting it, but here she's completely over it and very declarative of her stance on the fact that he perhaps was not the right guy for her. And I think the lyrics on here are absolutely amazing for the most part. There's a few passages that I especially love, like on the verse where she says, "Did I break your heart? Did I waste your time? I tried to be there for you. Then you tried to break mine." Ooh! That is some juicy, juicy lyricism right there. But yet again, the structure that she has on these songs really shine through in the way she brings back to your attention what the original intent of the verse was from the beginning. And then of course that leads right into the refrain, which is one of the catchiest on the entire album, where she says, "It isn't asking a lot for an apology for making me feel like it would kill you if I tried to leave. You said you never fall in love again because of me, and then you moved on immediately." Bum, 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 bum. No, but even that, like, you can just tell, like, how deeply personal and also just very matter-of-fact the song is, and how things went down, and how she even says, "I was the love of your life, but you were not mine." And to come to that conclusion immediately after the next song and not feel jarring at all really shows the growth that she's going on throughout the entirety of this record. And that's why I absolutely love, love, love how cohesive this is. And then of course this track, you know, spirals off into a completely different structure in the second half, featuring a very propulsive and auto-tune filled climax where Billie's just like screaming, and it's really, really great and very powerful. And I think it's definitely, sonically speaking, maybe the most standout track on this album. Of course, you even have a little bit of pitching vocal effects on this track that are very reminiscent of something like 8 off of When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? And yet again, the way it's mixed into the song is just absolute perfection. I really, really love what both Billie and Phineas did on the song in tandem with one another. Yet again, I think it's songs like these that mix all these very interesting elements that really prove that they're doing something that's beyond interesting in the landscape of pop music today. And this leads into the diner, which gives this very great French-esque backdrop in the music almost immediately, but really put to this very infectious electro-pop beat. And really one of the most interesting songs lyrically on this album, of course, talking about the experiences that Billie herself has had with stalkers in the past few years, and of course kind of getting into their mindset in trying to break down perhaps what's driving them, and how they often feel like, oh, they could be so great for this other person, but really breaks down the toxic mentality that goes along with that, and the very unhealthy nature of celebrity worship to that degree, of course, because I feel like most people aren't that insane. But I definitely love the way she breaks down the song, because it's very, very much personal in that regard. But stylistically speaking, I think this is one in a million. I really, really do. And I love all these elements coming together once again and creating something that's very wholly unique. Even though I will say I think some of the reverb on her vocals are a bit overdone on this song to the point that I can't really completely understand what she's singing, even though I really love what she's talking about lyrically. I think that there's just so much about the song musically, though, that works, that I still ended up loving it. Though I can't really say the same about the next track, Bittersweet, which follows in a very similar pattern to L'amour de ma vie, in regards to how it's broken down into two parts, but far less interesting and also very reminiscent of the last track in regards to how the vocals are a bit overdone with the reverb, and there's some really questionable production choices on this song, but I think some really great lyrics, especially in the front half of this track, though I will say this is probably the only other song I don't love on this record, along with Lunch. And of course that leads us to the last song on this record, Blue, which is split up into two parts. Of course, the first part being True Blue, not the Madonna song, and then the other part, Born Blue. And I love what each one of these sections does lyrically. Of course, the first half kind of recapping all the lyrical motifs that have occurred in all the other songs in typical Billie Eilish album closer fashion. Very similar to Goodbye, though I don't think it quite sticks the landing as hard as Goodbye, in my opinion, especially musically speaking, but I really love this connective tissue between all these songs. It really does make the album feel very conceptual in scope, and I love that when any album brings things back around, and so this song is very much true to that. But the second half to this is really just one of the most realistic, very level-headed conclusions on this relationship. It's very hard-hitting, straight to the point, really just cuts right through the bone what she's saying lyrically, especially the line where she says something like colder than your father's eyes. Like, oh my goodness, it just insinuates so much trauma that was in this other person that she was seeing, and how she can't help him, but you know, she wishes him the best. She doesn't hold anything against him, and that is how that relationship concluded, and that's how this album concludes, with such a declarative statement of freedom and acceptance. Yeah, I mean, that's how you'd want an album like this to end, at least in my opinion. And I think in that regard, this is really one of her absolute best. I think way better than Happier Than Ever, which I loved. Though I still prefer her debut album a bit more, because I think that is just one of the most era-defining pop albums to come out in recent memory. And I think a blueprint for pop that's going to be followed for a very long time. But if this album does anything, it more than reaffirms my stance on Billie Eilish as one of the most interesting voices in pop music. What her and Phineas are doing really reach beyond the conventions of what we have seen in pop music to date. And I really think that this cements her as the greatest artist of her generation. I truly mean that. You look back in the 21st century, in the first 10 years, I would say Kanye was that. In the last 10 years, I would say Kendrick was that. And I'm saying now, in this decade, Billie Eilish is that. And I think she is slowly becoming one of my favorite artists of all time. And I think, you know, 3 for 3, to love that many albums in a row is very hard. For me, it's only happened a few times where I love an artist's like first few records, first 3 records. I can think of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, I can think of the Velvet Underground, I can think of Bruce Springsteen, I can think of Bill Withers, I can think of Arctic Monkeys. And I can also think of Billie Eilish. That's a very lofty crowd to be in. And I'm not saying, of course, that she's on the level of Hendrix or anything like that. But what I am saying is that she is one of the most talented voices that we will hear in pop music, I think, you know, for the rest of the century, especially with this level of mainstream success, still creating and cultivating this very conceptual and very musical style that really stands out on her own, but still continues to be innovative. I think that this album truly is a testament to that, and I think it's going to be hard for any mainstream pop release to top this album for the rest of the year. And so on that note, I'm going to give Hit Me Hard and Soft a 9 out of 10, a very, very light one at that, because I do think some of the production choices here are a bit questionable, like what I had mentioned, and some vocal pitching that I'm not really a huge fan of, especially on Bittersweet. But regardless of that, I really think that this is just such a well-constructed, put together, and produced album from top to bottom that really cements her status as almost a legend at this point in music. And I think that is something that is going to be firmly planted in the next few years to come. But what did you guys think of Hit Me Hard and Soft? Let me know down in the comments below, and smash the like button if you like seeing reviews like this. I only want to come on and talk about albums that I'm really interested in, so you're not going to see me review every single big release that comes out throughout the year. But, you know, I probably will hit some of the artists I really love, and maybe a nice little indie surprise here and there. But I knew I had to come on and talk about this album. This is definitely going to be one of my top 5 albums of the year once we reach the end of the year and I get on to discuss that with you guys. But of course, thank you again for tuning into this discussion. I really appreciate the support, and until the next video, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one now.